Section 9.4 is on solving quadratic equations by completing the square. So this is yet another way to solve a quadratic equation, and if you can make one side of the equation into a perfect square trinomial, then you can factor it into something in parentheses squared, take the square root of each side, and then solve for x. This is called completing the square, because I'm going to make one side of the equation a perfect square. Here are the steps how to do it. Step number 1, move your existing value of c to the right side of the equal sign. So add or subtract it to get it on the other side of the equal sign. Then you need to find a new value for c. c is equal to b over 2 squared. Another way to think of this is whatever b is, take half of it and then square it. That's your new value of c. That's the value of c that will make it a perfect square trinomial. Add this value of c to both sides of the equation. Factor the left side. It will be a perfect square trinomial, so it will be easy to factor. Take the square root of each side and then just algebraically solve for x. Let's take a look at a couple examples. So we need to solve each quadratic equation by completing the square. So I have x squared plus 8x minus 9 equals 0. My first step is to move my existing c to the other side. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides of my equation. So that's going to give me x squared plus 8x equals 9. Now I need to find a new value of c that makes this side of the equation a perfect square so that I can factor it into something in parentheses squared. To do that, I'm going to do c equals b over 2 squared. So my b is 8 over 2 and square that. So that's 4 squared, or 16. So I'm going to add 16 here, add 16 here. So I have x squared plus 8x plus 16 equals 25. Now what's cool about this is this left side, x squared plus 8x plus 16, is a perfect square trinomial like we saw in the last chapter, and it will factor into x plus 4 squared. How did I get that? Well, I know it's a perfect square trinomial because I made it that way. So it's going to start with an x because I have an x squared here. It's going to be a plus in the middle because b has a plus in front of it. And then I'm going to take the square root of whatever my c is. Now, to solve this, I'm going to take the square root of each side. And we did a little bit of this in the last chapter. And then when I take the square root of 25, I'm going to do the positive or negative square root. On the left, the square root and the squared cancel each other out. So I have x plus 4 equals a positive or negative 5 because the square root of 25 is 5. At this point, I like to write two equations. So x plus 4 equals a positive 5, or x plus 4 equals a negative 5. And subtracting 4 from each side, I have x equals 1. And subtracting 4 from each side, I have x equals negative 9. So those are the two solutions I came to by completing the square. Let's take a look at another example here. X squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. So to complete the square, I'm going to move my existing c to the other side. So let's do a minus 1 on each side. X squared minus 4x equals a negative 1. Let's find a new value of c. To do that, I'm going to do b over 2 and square it. So negative 2 squared is 4. And notice, because you're squaring it, your c is always going to be a positive number. Okay, don't get confused. Negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4. So I'll add 4 to each side. And I'll have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 3. This side of the equation, the left side of the equal sign, is now a perfect square trinomial. So I can factor that into x minus 2 squared. Bring down your x, bring down the minus that's in the middle, take the square root of 4, and then that's squared. That equals 3. To get rid of the squared, take the square root of each side. And on the right, make sure you're doing the positive or negative square root. And since I can't really do the square root of 3, it's an irrational number, I'm just going to leave it like that. So I have x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 3. To simplify this, I do need to move that 2 to the other side, so I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So I have x equals a positive 2 plus or minus the square root of 3. And that's your final answer. Realize that is two numbers, 2 plus the square root of 3 and 2 minus the square root of 3. And it looks funny, but that's your answer. So, to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square, make sure that you follow these 6 steps. Make sure that you know how to factor a perfect square trinomial, and make sure that you always get to the point where you're going to have x equals, that you actually finish out solving for x.